In 1938, de Havilland's wooden unarmed speed-only bomber was politely rejected because metal was the future. Scarce aluminum and masterful laminated woodwork birthed the Mosquito, where speed is armor. On the flight line, fitter Roderick Banks quietly pushed Merlin margins, nudging boost from about 18 to about 20 psi, enriching mixture and limiting mods to pristine engines, trading for roughly 10 to 15 miles per hour, measurably higher survival. Combat returns validated the edge. On March 7, 1945, Rolls-Royce issued a technical bulletin that effectively sanctioned the tweaks. The Mosquito was brilliant, and Banks made it legendary. Wood was dismissed as a relic of an earlier age, unfit for the mechanized skies of modern war. Yet, de Havilland persisted. From that persistence emerged an elegant wooden aircraft, and the stage for an unlikely hero who would make it even faster. What follows reveals how speed became armor, and why innovation often rises from unexpected places on the front lines. In the late 1930s, Britain faced a brutal equation. Rearmament was accelerating while aluminum was scarce and fiercely contested. De Havilland reframed scarcity as opportunity, turning to laminated wood, birch plywood, Ecuadorian balsa, Canadian spruce, bonded with furniture-grade casein glues. The result was a structure, light and strong, producible by furniture and piano shops, scaling without stealing aluminum from fighter lines. From material limits emerged a bold doctrine for the Mosquito. Speed would be armor. Laminated birch, balsa, spruce, and furniture glues produced a structure both light and strong, crucially one buildable by furniture, and piano craftsmen otherwise locked out of metal airframe work. The Mosquito became a war machine assembled by peacetime hands, a bomber that did not cannibalize Spitfire resources. From that audacious 1939 foundation, the creed that speed is armor set the stage for field-wise tweaks that pushed the wooden bomber even faster and raised its odds of survival. On a sleek wooden airframe spanning 16.5 meters, the Mosquito mounted two Merlin engines shared with Hurricanes and Spitfires. No gun turrets, no bomb aimer's bay, just two crew in a cramped cockpit betting their lives on mathematics. The performance estimates promised something extraordinary: speed as armor. At altitude, the Mosquito topped 400 miles per hour faster than any fighter in service, making speed both armor and weapon. On the 25th of November, 1940 at Hatfield, the training yellow prototype lifted off and immediately felt eager under throttle. From that moment, the Mosquito ceased to be a risky experiment and became proof that survival could be engineered through speed. In February 1941, official trials at Boscombe Down proved the figures were real. At roughly 22,000 feet, the Mosquito prototype, heavy with test gear and not yet engine optimized, touched about 392 miles per hour. The Air Ministry's skepticism began to crack. Yet one hard truth remained: speed on paper and speed under enemy fire live in two entirely different worlds. Early Mosquitoes running Merlin XX engines were locked to strict boost limits, about 14 pounds per square inch for takeoff and less in cruise. Those figures weren't arbitrary, they came from detonation margins, bearing temperature ceilings, and piston crown stress calculations. Push beyond, and you invite snapped rods, melted pistons, and catastrophic failure at combat altitude. From that disciplined baseline, the Mosquito story pivots, knowing the red line isn't just about fear, it's about understanding when and how a carefully managed push can buy survival. The manuals were unequivocal: push past the red line, and you risk shattered rods, melted pistons, engines tearing themselves apart at 20,000 feet over enemy territory. Limits were sacred. Yet by late 1942, as Mosquito crews drove deeper into Germany, a troubling truth emerged: they were fast, but not quite fast enough. War was forcing a reckoning with peacetime safety margins and opening the door to bold, precise tweaks that traded engine life for survival speed. The Mosquito validated de Havilland's audacious idea: a wooden, unarmed bomber using speed as armor. But by the war's second hard year over Europe, the safety margin was thinning. Newer Focke-Wulf 190 and Messerschmitt 109 variants were closing in. Interceptions grew uncomfortably frequent. Crews returned with tracers scraping past dives that barely opened the gap, and engines screaming at emergency power that still wasn't emergency enough. The Mosquito was fast, but now it had to be faster. From this point, the story enters the gray zone between peacetime rules and wartime survival, rereading engineering margins, nibbling at safety factors, and squeezing a few more miles per hour to buy living time. When speed was no longer enough, the wooden Mosquito needed what blueprints never planned, and manuals never allowed someone who could read between the lines of tolerances and see possibility where others saw limits. Between peacetime caution and wartime necessity lies a gap, and in that gap, a frontline mechanic turned safety margins into life-saving velocity, trading a little engine life for a much greater chance of coming home, proving that field-borne initiative can save more crews than perfect procedure ever will. Roderick Banks was never meant to change anything, a fitter, not an engineer, and in 1942, that distinction was sacred in the Royal Air Force. In his Marham workshop in Norfolk, one among many scattered across Bomber Command, he tended Merlin engines for Lancasters, Halifaxes, and the growing Mosquito fleet. At that workbench, the man supposed to follow the manual began to see the gap between rules and wartime reality, the seed of a tweak so small on paper yet powerful enough to reshape survival in the sky. Roderick Banks began as a by-the-book fitter strip, the engine inspect components, replace what's worn, reassemble to spec, sign the log, return it to the line. The system ran on men who followed instructions exactly. But Banks had an unusual habit: he read everything. From maintenance manuals to dense spec tables, he traced the logic of boost limits, fuel mixture, and ignition timing, and saw a safety margin larger than the rules allowed. From execution to insight, he became the man who read beyond procedure to save crews, read to grasp, grasp to dare, and dare to turn speed into armor. Banks didn't just read maintenance manuals, he devoured the engineering specs, Rolls-Royce shipped with each engine, dense pages of thermodynamics and metallurgical tables most fitters ignored. He traced the logic behind boost limits and mixture ratios, then built his foundation at the Derby Works from 1935, spending 4 years watching the Merlin mature before the RAF recruited him. That habit of reading deep, forged on the shop floor, gave Banks what manuals could not, a feel for the engine's true safety margins. Insight he later turned into life-saving speed for the Mosquito and a wartime template for innovation. From below, Roderick Banks, a sergeant-level fitter with unusually deep Merlin knowledge, spotted a gap between the manual and the engineering data published. Boost limits were designed for safety under all conditions, while the hardware could actually tolerate slightly more. From early 1943, he discreetly recalibrated boost control and enriched the fuel mixture only on pristine engines, deliberately and carefully nibbling into the safety margin. The payoff was roughly 10 to 15 miles per hour at operational altitudes, turning speed into real armor. That bottom-up initiative paved the way for Rolls-Royce to later legitimize higher boost under strict conditions, proving that peacetime rules sometimes must bend to wartime reality, save lives today, even if it means paying the maintenance bill a bit sooner tomorrow. Rolls-Royce set a generous safety margin so engines would survive across countless conditions. Banks spotted the gap, trimmed that margin slightly, only on pristine Merlin units, and trade-controlled risk for life-saving speed. He tuned boost-knowing power scales directly with manifold pressure. A small rise could yield about 100 horsepower and roughly 15 miles per hour. In combat, those few miles per hour mark the line between being shot down and making it home. Adding 2 pounds per square inch of boost unlocked roughly 100 horsepower and about 15 miles per hour for the Mosquito, the thin line between a clean escape and a very short combat career. Yet beneath the tidy numbers lurked hard limits: run too rich and you waste the gain. Run too lean and detonation comes calling. Pushing beyond the book worked only with fresh engines, carefully enriched mixtures, and disciplined maintenance. In wartime, peacetime safety margins are traded for survival odds. The Mosquito could stretch just far enough to outrun German fighters, accepting accelerated wear and shorter engine hours as the necessary price for bringing crews home. Inside the Merlin, a prematurely detonating fuel-air charge hammers pistons with shock waves, cracking metal in seconds. 100-octane fuel resists knock, but it is not invincible. Roderick Banks realized the margin lived in precise mixture control. Running too lean, Too much air, not enough fuel sends cylinder temps soaring. A carefully enriched mix adds evaporative cooling, enabling measured boost increases while staying within hardware limits. By trimming mixture and nudging boost, Banks turned speed is armor from theory into survival math. The Mosquito could open the gap on German fighters, trading a few % more wear for many times better odds that crews came home. Running too rich wastes the advantage. The mixture's sweet spot is razor thin and shifts with altitude and throttle. Roderick Banks began small. He chose one overhaul-bound Merlin as a laboratory, recalibrated the boost control, and advanced the overboost cutoff by 2 psi. With pristine maintenance and tight thermal monitoring, that tiny tweak unlocked extra power and speed enough to turn minutes of danger into breathing room. His credo was simple, controlled bending of safety margins in exchange for survival at combat altitude. On the test stand, Banks enriched the fuel mixture at high power, using evaporative cooling to keep temperatures in check. The engine howled at limits the Rolls-Royce manuals marked for emergencies only, yet held those settings for minutes rather than seconds. Temperatures rose but stayed within tolerance. Nothing cracked, nothing melted. The technical evidence was undeniable, but convincing the system to fit that change to operational aircraft was a different battle entirely, where peacetime caution, paperwork, and fear of blame often outweighed the brutal calculus of survival. In combat, within the Royal Air Force, engineering officers feared unauthorized modifications more than enemy fire. Any change crawled through slow approvals committees, reviewing committees, and risk assessments filed in triplicate, a peacetime tempo in a wartime world. In that gray zone, Banks's adjustment was not illegal, yet utterly unsanctioned. The tension between survival and procedure carved out a narrow space for initiative, the place where the rulebook stops and the chance to save lives begins. To turn an idea into life or death performance, Banks needed someone willing to stake a reputation on a fitter's intuition. He found that in Channer, a Mosquito squadron leader who had survived 3 tours and nursed a healthy skepticism for official caution. On a February 1943 run over Cologne, a Bf 109, G had closed so tight that he could see the German pilot's oxygen mask. That moment made Channer the ideal advocate. When survival is measured in a few miles, he would gamble on the unused safety margin. Banks uncovered trading mechanical risk for a real chance to make it home. The near-miss memory made Channer receptive to Banks and pragmatic. If it works, it's initiative. If it fails, Banks takes the blame. On a Friday night, with the station engineering officer away, Banks and 2 trusted riggers quietly tweaked the boost controls and fuel system on Channer's Mosquito serial DZ414. That moment stepped across the line between regulation and survival, deliberately spending safety margin for the speed that could bring a crew home alive. By dawn, the Mosquito sat on dispersal, indistinguishable from every other aircraft on the squadron. No markings, no tells. Only the logbook whispered the truth, a vague line: fuel mixture, optimization, routine adjustment. In reality, it was Banks nudging past the safety margin, trading paperwork subtlety for real speed and survival. In war, he needed no applause, only crews coming home. And sometimes the distance between being shot down and making it back is hidden in a single, harmless-looking note. The Merlin's boost control was surprisingly simple. A sealed barometric bellows expanded with altitude, mechanically capping maximum boost to protect the engine in thinner air. That very simplicity made Banks's tweak, softening the spring to raise the limit, both feasible and dangerous. A tiny adjustment could buy life-saving speed or push past safe margins. The lesson is clear: peacetime limits are safety nets for all conditions, but in war, only rigorous quality control and deep mechanical understanding can justify bending the rules responsibly. Rolls-Royce calibrated the boost capsules conservatively, assuming throttle abuse under stress, variable fuel quality, and imperfect maintenance. Banks saw that safety margin as usable headroom. He targeted the calibration itself, easing the spring to allow slightly higher boost, enriching the mixture for cooling, and applying changes only to fresh, impeccably maintained engines. The payoff was a small but decisive speed edge that pulled Mosquitoes beyond gun range, a wartime trade of engine life for crew survival. By fitting a slightly softer spring in the boost control, Banks nudged the limit from 18 to 20.2 psi, a tiny change on paper that at 20,000 feet lifted speed from about 380 to 395 miles per hour. In pursuit geometry, that margin pulls you from gun range to safety in under 3 minutes. The harder part was fuel mixture, enriched just enough to cool and prevent detonation, no more, no less, and only on engines fresh and perfectly maintained. Folded back into the Mosquito's legend, its speed as armor field, innovation over peacetime caution, and a string of precise tweaks that delivered survivals no manual ever promised. The Merlin carburetor metered fuel through tiny brass jets that switched by altitude and throttle. Rolls-Royce set them slightly lean at high power to save fuel and prevent plug fouling. Banks studied the specs and saw margin. He fitted a main jet, exactly 1 drill size larger, and enriched the mixture under full power, adding evaporative cooling that dropped exhaust temperatures by about 40 degrees. That let the Merlin tolerate short bursts around 20 pounds per square inch of boost, yielding roughly 10 to 15 miles per hour, more just enough for the Mosquito to open the gap on German fighters. The trade-off was accelerated wear, but it bought crews their lives, a stark wartime optimization beyond peacetime limits, made possible only by meticulous, exacting maintenance. As the Mosquito needed more speed to survive, Banks realized a richer mix doesn't just burn, it evaporates inside the cylinders, soaking up heat and shielding the aluminum pistons. He fitted a main jet, 1 drill size larger, raising fuel flow by about 8% at full throttle, lowering exhaust temperatures, delaying detonation, and enabling higher boost for longer. The result, the wooden bomber held its pull, gained those crucial extra miles per hour, and turned engineering margin into real crew survival. To turn speed into armor, Banks didn't just raise boost. He enriched the mixture at high power, dropping exhaust gas temperatures by roughly 40 degrees Celsius, a form of thermal insurance that avoided detonation and pre-ignition once cylinder heat crossed critical thresholds. In parallel, he paid careful attention to magneto timing, applying changes conservatively and only on as-new Merlins, under tight monitoring. The payoff was about 10 to 15 miles per hour more, at altitude enough to pull clear of German guns. Later, once combat results made the case, a technical bulletin issued on March 7, 1945, formalized the practice under strict conditions: fresh engines, verified fuel, mandatory inspections, privileging survival today over absolute longevity tomorrow. Inside, the Merlin Spark arrives before top dead center. Rolls-Royce fixed it at 15 degrees as a careful compromise of power and safety. Banks pushed timing to 18 degrees only on fresh, perfectly serviced engines, squeezing more work from every combustion stroke while raising stresses on rods and crankshaft. Paired with modest overboost and a richer mixture, that extra margin turned speed into armor, enough for the Mosquito to edge away from German fighters, at the cost of faster wear and stricter maintenance discipline. It is wartime engineering in a sentence: spend engine life to buy a few more miles per hour, sometimes exactly the difference between coming home and not returning. Banks knew the Merlin's bottom-end crankcase and bearings could handle extra load only when the engine was in pristine condition. Even slightly worn bearings or subtly oval cylinders turned overboost into catastrophe. So he applied obsessive selection. Only fresh, perfectly measured even compression engines were allowed beyond the line. Anything showing the faintest wear reverted to standard spec. The payoff was survival speed for the Mosquito, but within iron discipline: pick the right engines, respect the margins, and accept heavier maintenance in exchange for a better chance of coming home. Banks selected only Merlin engines fresh from overhaul, with new pistons bearings verified to within 1/1000th of an inch, and perfectly matched compression across 12 cylinders. On that technically perfect baseline, he nudged boost limits, enriched mixtures, and refined ignition, pushing boundaries without denying physics. His modifications broke no explicit rule, precisely because the rulebook never anticipated them. The trade-off was accelerated wear, but the payoff was an extra 10 to 15 miles per hour, enough to turn gun range into safety, letting Mosquitoes slip beyond German fighters and proving a wartime creed when survival demands it. You leverage science plus discipline to borrow from the safety margin and repay it with rigorous maintenance. While RAF maintenance doctrine assumed fitters followed manufacturer specs, Exactly the rulebook never banned overboost tweaks, simply because it never imagined anyone would try. Banks stepped into the gray zone between explicit permission and explicit prohibition, where initiative coexists with career-ending risk. With deep Merlin knowledge and immaculate maintenance discipline, he deliberately spent a sliver of safety margin to buy life-saving speed, a wartime trade-off that peacetime rarely tolerates. Rolls-Royce's official stance was uncompromising: exceed operating limits, and the warranty is void. They tested engines to destruction, logging the exact moments when pistons softened, bearings seized, and crankshafts twisted, building safety margins because a failure at altitude meant dead crews, investigations, and reputations shattered. Yet war rewards calculated risk. A few practitioners read those margins as usable space, accepting accelerated wear to buy survival, turning speed into armor for the Mosquito. Rolls-Royce wasn't the one flying through tracer fire, Banks was. He wagered on minutes, not hours, of overboost, trusted 100-octane fuel's detonation resistance, hand-picked only the finest engines, and relied on riggers who monitored temperatures with near-obsessive focus. The trade-off was accelerated mechanical wear, but the payoff was survival-grade speed. In wartime, he proved that peacetime safety margins can yield to combat optimization if and only if ruthless maintenance, discipline, deep technical knowledge, and tight control of variables stand guard. The morning after the tweaks, the Mosquito launched into a standard profile climb to roughly 15,000 feet, level off at cruise power. Then the moment of truth: throttles to the stops, boost needles sliding past the red line, settling around 20. It was vivid proof that Banks's off-book adjustments worked: speed as armor, turning a few extra miles per hour into the line between being caught and getting clear, setting the stage for future sorties to slip beyond German fighters' bronzes. Reach. The morning after Banks tuned DZ-414, Peter Channer took off alone on a standard test profile climb to 15,000 feet, level at cruise. Then the moment of truth. He slammed the throttles to the stops, watched the boost needles sweep past the red line, and settle at 20. The Merlin's note hardened, the wooden bomber leapt forward. In seconds, a mechanic's rule-bending insight turned speed into armor, proving that peacetime limits don't solve wartime survival. From that audacious test, the Mosquito's edge became tangible, a proof of concept that would be formalized later and help bring more aircrews home alive. The Merlin's note deepened into a harder, more urgent howl, the airspeed unwinding past numbers Channer had never seen in level flight, and the proof arrived over Gelsenkirchen on April 19, 1943. The task: a daylight reconnaissance of synthetic oil plants in the Ruhr Valley, perfect bait for every Luftwaffe controller within radar range. The Mosquito crossed the Dutch coast at 24,000 feet, cameras warm, and speed became armor, a wooden, unarmed bomber, betting its life on instruments and geometry, and winning. Under crystal-clear skies, the navigator kept calling landmarks over the intercom: perfect visibility, terrible for staying unseen. 18 minutes into enemy airspace, two Focke-Wulf fighters clawed up from near Münster to cut them off. Channer calmly finished the camera run, then tapped Banks's outside. The manual margin raised boost to about 20 psi with a richer mixture. The Mosquito surged, held energy in a gentle descent, opened the gap beyond gun range, and made it home-proof that frontline innovation can turn survival into a matter of smart engineering, not luck. On German scopes, the vector lines were flawless fighters set ahead to cut the escape route to the North Sea. Channer spotted them at roughly 6 miles, two dark specks pivoting through cumulus. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine dove from above and behind, stacking fire from 20mm cannon and 13mm machine guns. But Channer did not panic. He held course, finished the run, and then unleashed what Banks had hidden inside those Merlin's raised boost and richer mixture. The Mosquito surged, drawing the horizon toward itself. Yard by yard, the gap slipped beyond gun range. A perfect interception unraveled into a futile chase. With the camera run completed and film still rolling, two Focke-Wulf 190 fighters closed in. Channer murmured to his navigator, "Let's see what Banks gave us." The throttles were already at their stops. He flipped the override and pushed into territory the Rolls-Royce manuals reserved for emergencies only. The boost crept to 20, the Merlin's note deepened harder, more urgent. The Mosquito surged, turning math into armor as speed stretched the gap yard by yard, until enemy guns fell silent out of range. This wasn't mere rule-breaking. It was precise reading of safety margins, using disciplined maintenance to tap real latent performance trading, peacetime caution for the wartime seconds that keep a crew alive. The boost needles surged to 20 pounds and a fraction beyond. The Merlin's note hardened, shivering through the airframe, and the Mosquito leapt like it had been kicked. The airspeed swept past 400 miles per hour, still climbing, turning speed as armor into reality. Behind that moment was Roderick Banks's calculated risk-easing boost limits, enriching mixture, and selecting only flawless engines, trading accelerated wear for the survival margin no German fighter could close. The altimeter unwound, even with throttles wide open. The Mosquito deliberately traded height for speed in a shallow descent, preserving energy to stretch the gap. The FW-190 pilot recognized it and dove steeper to maintain pursuit geometry, holding station for about 30 seconds. Then the speed edge from higher permitted boost and cooling rich mixture told the distance opened, from gun range toward safety, a vivid proof that carefully eating into the margin at the right moment could save lives. In a life-or-death chase, Channer's Mosquito pushed past book limits, easing into a shallow descent to trade height for speed. The gap stretched 500 yards, then 600, then 700. The Focke-Wulf was blisteringly fast in a dive, nearly 430 miles per hour, but couldn't sustain that in level flight, while the Mosquito could. After about 30 seconds, a small edge became safety. The airspeed needle kept sweeping forward. The altimeter unwound slowly, and German contrails slid farther behind the wooden wings. At roughly 800 yards beyond gun range, the Focke-Wulfs broke off. Even with throttles to the firewall draining every ounce of power those BMW radials could give, it wasn't enough. Channer held full power for about 3 minutes, crossed back over friendly coastline, then finally eased back. That moment sealed what Mosquito crews had been whispering with. Quietly, off-book tweaks. Pure speed turned a lethal interception into a foot race. The wooden wonder could actually win. After settling into cruise, the Merlin ran hot but within safe limits, and more importantly, the pilot was alive. The intel officer filed it clinically, successfully evaded 2 German fighters through speed advantage. What the report missed was the meaning. This wasn't luck, it was physics, winning meticulous maintenance and quiet ingenuity turning speed into armor. A handful of extra miles per hour became the thin line between death and survival proof that subtle hangar-level adjustments could bend the rulebook and bring crews home. This was not luck or clever stick and rudder work, it was physics prevailing. The Luftwaffe's premier interceptor, built to slaughter Allied bombers, was outrun in level flight by the very aircraft it should have destroyed. From that moment, word flashed through Mosquito squadrons, with the velocity reserved for truly useful truths: smart boost, precise mixture, ruthless maintenance, discipline turning speed into armor, and survival into a repeatable tactic. After one dramatic escape, word raced through the squadrons: if you wanted a truly unlocked Mosquito, ask Channer, then follow his knowing nod to Banks. By roughly May, 3 Mosquitoes at Marham had received the quiet upgrades. By June, Banks's shop had become an unofficial performance center where rulebook silent tweaks turned speed into armor. From there, bottom-up ingenuity quietly became a survival edge, a network powered by trust, meticulous maintenance, and the courage to trade accelerated wear for a better chance to come home alive. Banks's engine tweaks remained technically unsanctioned, yet station commanders increasingly tolerated them because bringing crews home mattered more than regulatory perfection. Combat reports through the summer of 1943 told the story. On the 17th of June, a modified Mosquito outran 3 Messerschmitt 109 G6 fighters over Hamburg. On the 3rd of July, another escaped a determined chase by ace Kurt Bühligen. The edge came from carefully eating into safety margins, roughly 10 to 15 extra miles per hour, via higher boost and richer mixture on only the best engines, trading faster wear for survival. From then on, speed wasn't just a number, it was armor and a ticket back to base. An ace with 112 victories still could not catch the Mosquito proof that speed had the final word. On the 22nd of August, a Mosquito limped home on one engine after flak damage, yet Banks's rule-bending tweaks on the remaining Merlin let it stay ahead of two pursuing Messerschmitts. From then on, the figures stopped being a debate, they became evidence, small modifications, strict maintenance, and a measurable edge between loss and survival. Because of Banks's off-book tweaks, modified Mosquitoes returned from sorties that standard aircraft did not, with a loss rate less than half of unmodified counterparts. Survival bought time, time built experience, and experience delivered sharper bombing results, a self-reinforcing virtuous circle. It culminated in Operation Jericho, precision bordering on suicide, where speed plus engineering discipline converted safety margins into margins of survival. In northern France, Amiens prison held 120 members of the French resistance, slated for execution on the 19th of February 1944. Through SOE networks, London received a desperate plea: break the walls, give them a chance to scatter, or they die. The mission demanded Mosquitoes to strike a 3-story building with 500-pound bombs, breaching specific sections, without collapsing the structure onto the prisoners, a high-stakes fusion of speed and precision, aided by off-manual tweaks that made the Mosquito faster and more survivable. In broad daylight, Mosquitoes dived to rooftop height barely 300 meters from the prison walls deep inside occupied territory. Group Captain Percy Pickard led battle-tested crews from 140 wing veterans of Oslo, Berlin, and missions even bolder. 4 days of meticulous planning followed photographic reconnaissance, dissected the prison's layout in exacting detail. Speed was the armor, precision was survival, and behind that armor of speed were surgical engine tweaks, slightly higher boost, richer mixture, turning a razor-thin margin into the difference between being caught and getting home through fully alerted defenses. The outer walls were 2 feet thick, the guard barracks sat tight against the main block, German quarters were to be destroyed while French sections remained theoretically intact. The attack would occur at rooftop height around 50 feet, a heartbeat off, and the blast from your own bombs could tear the aircraft apart. The mission demanded ultra-low navigation, precision bomb release, and a pre-planned egress along a safe axis. It was surgery at speed: break the wall that must fall, spare what must stand, and clear the target before the shockwave could catch your wings. On the morning of the 18th of February 19, Mosquitoes lifted from RAF Hunden, skimming the waves across the channel by stopwatch and compass navigation, reaching AMO at precisely 12:03. Pickard led the first wave. 6 Mosquitoes climbing to 150 feet for their attack runs a small, precise, and audacious formation where speed and discipline stood in for defensive guns, setting the tone for a daylight strike into the heart of the target. The bombs hit perfectly, smashing sections of the outer wall and breaching the eastern side near the condemned cells. The second wave collapsed the guard quarters, sowing chaos. The third wave merely circled in reserve and was not needed. Intelligence later confirmed 258 prisoners escaped amid the confusion most slated for execution. Yet that was only the first survival problem. The homebound dash across daylight Germany demanded sustained speed, and the off-the-books boost gains helped many Mosquitoes stretch the gap from gun range to safety. At midday, with German radar fully alert, the Mosquito formations regrouped, and the Luftwaffe scrambled every available fighter from airfields between Amiens and the coast. The British crews faced roughly 40 minutes of exposure over open countryside, where Wehrmacht units along every road coordinated interceptions by radio. Pickard's Mosquito never made it home, a stark reminder that even a precision strike can end in loss when escape routes close fast. After the strike, 2 Focke-Wulf 190 fighters caught Pickard's aircraft near Bet. Their guns found the target before any evasive maneuver was possible, and he and his navigator were killed instantly. 2 other Mosquitoes also fell to fighters in those brutal minutes after the attack. The blood-priced lesson, flying straight and level for bombing accuracy, makes you a perfect target. From that moment, speed as armor became more than a motto. The need for extra speed and acceleration margins turned into a survival requirement, paving the way for Banks's beyond-spec adjustments that later helped other crews get home. 16 Mosquitoes made it home largely because Banks's now standardized tweaks tipped the balance. Leading the second wave near Abbeville Squadron leader Ian McRitchie faced 4 FW-190s climbing to intercept. With roughly 10 extra miles per hour from the tuned Merlins, a potential dogfight turned into a flat-out race, the Mosquito opening the gap while German guns reached only from futile long range. The takeaway is stark in wartime. A small slice of safety margin traded for speed can mean an entire formation lives to fly again. 20mm rounds fell harmlessly behind the tail as the gap grew. South of the cloud deck, a Gustav variant interceptor executed a textbook bounce that should have shredded Airedale's Mosquito across a French field. Instead, with throttles through the stop and the Merlins howling beyond peacetime limits, the wooden bomber didn't jink it, unwound the pursuit geometry. Sustained speed, energy-preserving flight, and calm hands turned the attacker's brief advantage into a futile chase. When the tracers finally arced wide of effective range, the fighter broke off, and the Mosquito slipped away. This wasn't luck or flair alone, it was physics unlocked by meticulous wartime tweaks. Airedale slammed the throttles forward, the Merlin's note hardening as boost climbed into Banks's modified range. The Gustav variant BF-109 hung on at first, but capable is not sustained. Over Picardy for nearly 3 minutes at full power, the Mosquito's higher, steadier speed, from boost and mixture tweaks, slowly opened the gap until German guns fell out of range. This was not luck or fancy flying. It was physics plus meticulous maintenance. At low altitude, dense air shaved performance from both aircraft, turning the chase into endurance rather than burst acceleration. Airedale's Mosquito held about 405 miles per hour, while the 109 could sustain only about 395. Starting roughly 600 yards off the tail, close enough to worry too far to kill, the gap opened, slowly, incrementally. A mere 10-mile-per-hour advantage, but at low level, it compounded over time, stretching the distance safely beyond gun range. With just 10 miles per hour more and 3 minutes of persistence, the gap stretched to half a mile, enough for the German pilot to fire a futile burst and break off, likely low on fuel. All 12 Mosquitoes with Banks's modifications made it home. The 4 losses were Pickard's unmodified aircraft and 3 flying standard specs. The takeaway is clear: a small speed margin compounded at the right moment can buy the survival of an entire crew. The sample size was small, and the stats were not definitive, but air crews did not need a graph to believe what they saw. More crews came home. By early March, word of mouth became a queue of requests from squadrons Banks had never met, while engineering officers quietly looked the other way at tweaks they could not officially endorse. Bottom-up innovation slipped past bureaucracy, a touch more boost, a richer mixture, and ruthless maintenance discipline trading a few miles per hour for lives. In wartime, the line between following procedure and doing what is necessary rarely aligns. At Harrenhal on the 8th of March 1944, Hermann Göring erupted during a technical briefing demanding why German fighters could not catch British wooden furniture, the Mosquito. His fury exposed a strategic humiliation. A lightweight wooden aircraft leveraging pure speed and careful use of safety margins had slipped beyond interception. The Mosquito did more than hit targets. It shattered the belief that Germany's cutting-edge technology was unbeatable. In broad daylight over Berlin plywood, Mosquitoes sliced into the capital's airspace, photographing the chancellery, while Bf-109s flailed below. The humiliation was tactical, political, and deeply personal. Göring had promised air supremacy, yet wooden bombers streaking at nearly 400 miles per hour mocked that pledge. In response, Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf received urgent orders to wring more speed from existing airframes. Desperation dressed as innovation as engineers fully grasped the performance dilemma the Mosquito had created. At altitude in the hands of a competent crew, the Mosquito lived inside a performance envelope that German fighters could not quite sustain in a chase. Close, maddeningly close, but aviation awards no points for proximity. Germany's answer was the Bf-109 G10 with the DB6-05D, improved supercharging and emergency boost, pushing output to roughly 2,000 horsepower. On paper, impressive. In the sky, the Mosquito's durable edge, especially when its engine margins were smartly exploited, kept turning almost within reach into never quite there. Germany chased peak speed at all costs. The G-10 could touch 426 miles per hour at ideal altitude, but only briefly, with engine life measured in hours rather than days. Banks's illegal tweak, a modest overboost of about 2 psi, a richer mixture, and strict selection of only pristine engines delivered sustainable speed, adding roughly 10 to 15 miles per hour, just enough to flip pursuit geometry. The Mosquito eased beyond gun range and lived. Core lesson: fragile, overtuned bursts lose to intelligently harvested safety margins in a war of attrition. Even though the TA-152 prototypes reached a remarkable roughly 472 miles per hour at about 41,000 feet, thanks to a pressurized cockpit, longer wings, and the Jumo Tu-13 with MW-50 injection, Germany's maintenance and logistics could not sustain that kind of squadron-wide abuse. The result: Kurt Tank's refined machine arrived too late and in too few numbers to dominate Mosquito operations, especially once those wooden bombers were uncorked within safe margins that turned small speed edges into survival. By January 1945, the TA-152 reached frontline units too late and in numbers too small to matter. In frustration, several Luftwaffe outfits tried to mimic Banks dialing unauthorized boost into DB-605 and BMW-801 engines to claw back a few miles per hour. The outcome underscored a harsh reality: without time, materials, and quality control, eating into safety margins only spikes wear and triggers catastrophic failures. The Mosquito's edge, by contrast, came from Banks's disciplined method, raising boost only on fresh engines, enriching mixture for cooling, and enforcing strict monitoring, trading component life for speed and speed for survival. When German crews tried to force their engines, like the Merlin airframes literally came apart over their own fields. Failed bearings, cracked pistons, connecting rods punching through crankcases, the price of war-strained manufacturing, and inconsistent maintenance. The Mosquito's edge, by contrast, came from precise reading of safety margins and disciplined upkeep, pushing limits only on pristine engines, with verified fuel and rigorous checks. The core lesson: real power is not reckless rule-breaking, but knowing the true engineering margin and using it conditionally to buy survival. The core problem was not merely engineering, it was an industrial base under siege. Rolls-Royce plants sustained consistent material quality, skilled labor, and uninterrupted supply chains, preserving tight tolerances and dependable engines. By contrast, late-war German aero engine production was dispersed, reliant on coerced labor of uneven skill, and forced to substitute inferior materials as proper alloys ran short. Tolerances suffered accordingly. The consequence was stark: the British could trust rated performance and safely tap built-in margins, while the Germans paid in durability, reliability, and high-stress survivability in combat. Once quality control became theoretical, engines that looked fine on paper failed under combat stress. Fighter General Adolf Galland grasped this with bitter clarity in an April 1944 memo to Goering. He admitted that even well-placed German interceptions often lost the Mosquito to sustained high-speed flight. Matching that pace risked mechanical failure. He asked to pull fighters from lesser sectors to mass against Mosquito routes. Meanwhile, Germany was trapped by strained industry and fragile engines as the RAF quietly unlocked Merlin's safety margins, nudging boost, enriching mixture, and enforcing meticulous maintenance. The payoff was a durable speed edge that stretched the gap from gun range to safety, practical field engineering, outmaneuvering paperwork orthodoxy. Mid-war, a plan to mass overwhelming numbers against Mosquito routes was rejected by Goering, who clung to the belief that German engineering superiority would soon humble British plywood. Yet, on the line, wooden Mosquitoes won with pragmatic speed and bottom-up innovation. Banks's unofficial tweaks, slightly higher boost, richer mixtures, rigorous maintenance added roughly 10 miles per hour, enough to stretch the gap from gun range to safety. In the end, faith in a future technical miracle lost to a mechanic's field-tested reality, trading engine life for crew survival today. Goering redirected resources to the Me-262 jets, promising speed that would make the Mosquito obsolete. They were indeed fast, but arrived in handfuls when hundreds were needed, flown by hastily trained crews and burning fuel Germany could not spare. Meanwhile, Mosquito operations intensified. and with Banks's illegal tweaks raising boost to about 20 enriching mixture and selecting only perfect engines, they gained a modest 10 to 15 mile/hour edge that turned homebound runs from near certain death into survival. The enduring lesson in war survival today outranks longevity tomorrow, and meaningful innovation often rises from the workshop, not the boardroom. In broad daylight, Mosquito bombers struck targets. Heavy bombers dared hit only at night, the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt V weapons sites along the French coast and the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen. The psychological shock outweighed the physical damage German civilians watched. Wooden ghosts streak overhead, untouched by flak or fighters, and knew the Luftwaffe had lost control of the sky. In the bitter lines of Luftwaffe diaries, Lieutenant Hauptmann Heinzke, credited with 33 victories, conceded his frustration with the Mosquito. The Tommy flew like the devil was behind him. In truth, the devil lived inside its engines. Roderick Banks's quiet tweaks, raising boost to about 20 enriching mixtures and selecting only flawless power plants, gave the wooden bomber an edge the design office never planned for. This episode exposes the clash between peacetime discipline and wartime survival, when speed becomes armor and workshop initiative saves lives that procedure cannot. By autumn 1944, Banks's workshop at Marham had become part legend, part logistical lifeline. Crews arrived from other stations with whiskey and thorny engine problems, hoping the sergeant with the magic touch would bless their Merlins. Demand soon outgrew what one man could do, and the solution emerged organically. Banks quietly trained a circle of fitters to pick only the freshest engines, nudge the limits with care, and enforce wartime maintenance discipline. From there, escape speed became a repeatable advantage, trading a little mechanical risk for a much greater chance that more crews would make it home. Banks quietly built a disciplined, discreet training network, selecting fitters with Rolls-Royce experience or clear initiative, inviting them to observe teaching the theory, while his hands demonstrated the practice resetting boost, control upsizing fuel jets, and advancing ignition timing. The know-how spread by personal recommendation, invisible in paperwork, yet consistent on the shop floor, turning small adjustments into a survival edge, while anchoring everything to uncompromising maintenance discipline. At Marham, Banks turned a field hack into disciplined engineering. Every procedure was demonstrated twice, then attempted by the student under supervision. Anyone who couldn't explain why the modification worked, not just how to do it, was rejected because understanding is what prevents mechanical disasters. From this rigor, Flight Sergeant Thomas Yardley emerged as the standout student theory, fluent hands, steady and wise enough to know when to stop. That's how a bottom-up innovation hardened into a survival standard, unlocking speed the peacetime manuals never dared to allow. Yardley spent 3 years at Rolls-Royce's Hillington plant near Glasgow, before joining the RAF, bringing an intuitive grasp of thermodynamics that Banks recognized immediately. By November 1944, he was hands-on modifying engines at RAF Coningsby for Lancaster squadrons, beginning to receive Merlin-powered variants. From a line fitter, he became an amplifier for Banks's quiet network, standardizing richer fuel settings, tighter boost control, and rigorous maintenance discipline. Not flashy miracles, but cumulative life-saving margins across the long, punishing sorties of the heavy bombers. The engine tweaks boosted heavy bombers' climb rate and service ceiling, even if a Lancaster still could not outrun fighters with mere adjustments. That extra margin made them marginally harder targets, buying crucial survival time under dense fire. Meanwhile, Corporal James Dennison established a new node at RAF Whiten in Cambridge, dedicated to Mosquito squadrons, turning a grassroots fix into a systematized edge. Dennison, younger than Banks at just 23, absorbed the field lessons and then refined fuel mixture settings for distinct mission profiles. Low-level anti-shipping runs needed a richer blend, while high-altitude reconnaissance required a different balance to protect thermal margins. From these micro-adjustments, he built mission-specific engine configurations that locked neatly onto Banks's foundation-controlled overboost, precisely enriched mixtures applied only to fresh, perfectly maintained engines under 5 Li. Vigilant monitoring. The unofficial network spread face-to-face with tight information, discipline letting results speak for themselves, a modest but crucial speed edge that stretched chases into endurance contests the Mosquito could win. It was disciplined maintenance, fused with bottom-up innovation, quiet, exacting, and life-saving. Banks's upgrade network ran in deliberate silence, no telephones, no official memos, just face-to-face handovers between mechanics, disguised as routine maintenance. Squadron engineering officers practiced plausible deniability, aware the engines were hotter, while the paperwork showed only standard overhauls and adjustments. This was bottom-up innovation, reading the safety margins bending procedure when war demanded it, trading added wear for living crews. The Mosquito was already fast, and became faster through quiet tweaks, leaving a durable lesson in wartime. The optimal solution rarely lives only in the manual. Banks's network operated as a shadow system, squeezing extra performance from Merlin engines through channels the bureaucracy refused to acknowledge. If questioned, senior officers could truthfully claim ignorance even as Air Ministry rules still required formal approval, testing, and documentation for any modification. That arrangement suited everyone except the regulations. In wartime, the gray space between permission and prohibition saved lives. The Mosquito ran faster, opened the gap in pursuit, and brought more crews home at the cost of higher mechanical wear managed by strict maintenance discipline. It is a lesson in bottom-up innovation. When peacetime rules lag behind survival, deep technical mastery, paired with ethical rigor, can create a new margin of safety. Pushed-margin Merlin engines gave Mosquitoes measurably better results, more sorties completed, fewer combat losses, and more successful target strikes gained so clear they drowned out procedural objections. Yet, the price was real: higher mechanical risk, shorter component life, and every extra notch of boost was a tightly managed gamble. Banks never sugarcoated it. He faced the wartime truth head-on: accept accelerated wear today to bring more crews home alive. Raising boost bought survival at a mechanical price. Parts that normally lasted 200 hours between overhauls sometimes needed replacement at 150 hours. Piston crowns eroded faster, and exhaust valves showed increased wear. This is the wartime trade-off: more maintenance for a higher chance of coming home. Strict discipline, pulling engines at 150 hours, tight temperature monitoring, and selecting only pristine power plants turned risk into a life-saving margin. Performance came with a maintenance bill. In late 1944, a Mosquito lifting from a forward strip suffered a port engine connecting rod failure at roughly 400 feet. The rod punched through the crankcase oil, hit hot exhausts, and fire erupted. The crew stayed composed, cut fuel, feathered the prop, then nursed the aircraft around on the remaining engine for a safe landing. The incident exposed the true cost of overboosting, yet it also affirmed Banks's discipline: modify only fresh engines, monitor temperatures rigorously, and accept shorter service life in exchange for a higher chance of survival. In war, surviving today outweighs preserving parts for tomorrow. The fire consumed the wing, and the post-accident inquiry found the engine had been tweaked 3 weeks earlier. Banks inspected the wreckage himself: a failed connecting rod with classic fatigue, cracking from repeated overloading. The log showed 178 hours since overhaul, still within limits. The episode exposes the trade-off behind speed for wear. Frontline ingenuity saved sorties, but raised mechanical risk, forcing tighter maintenance discipline from Banks. And, ultimately, a Rolls-Royce service bulletin on March 7, 1945 that legitimized the approach. A near-fatal incident, an engine run 28 hours past the 150 hours limit, pushed Banks from quiet improvisation to disciplined control. He created a simple tracking notebook, each modified engine logged with serial number, modification date, and an hour cap. Copies went to trained fitters with explicit orders: pull at the limit no matter how healthy it looks. From then on, extra performance came with strict oversight trading, accelerated wear for better odds of survival in combat. To save crews rather than engines, Banks enforced a hard rule: pull the power plant the moment it hit its hour limit, no matter how healthy it looked. This extra conservatism increased maintenance load, but drove failures down to near zero within a few months, turning speed into real armor for the Mosquito. From there, station commanders faced a stark dilemma: peacetime paperwork demands longevity, wartime reality demands survival. They chose studied ignorance of unofficial tweaks, trading spanners, and spare parts for more lives coming home. Engineering officers could not officially authorize modifications that broke Air Ministry protocol, yet they also could not afford to lose the life-saving edge those tweaks delivered. So they practiced, studied, ignorance, vague verbal guidance to maintain engines at optimal performance language, elastic enough to mean everything or nothing. That bargain held until the cost became undeniable. On the 14th of January, 1945, wear rates, mechanical risk, and human lives forced a reckoning that speed was purchased with engine life and often with survival. In the narrow space between peacetime procedure and wartime necessity, those unofficial adjustments became armor made of physics, a few extra miles per hour traded for many more crews making it home. 40 minutes into a deep reconnaissance over Kiel, the starboard Merlin's temperature spiked beyond safe limits. David Wilson throttled back at once, yet oil pressure kept falling while metal temperatures climbed, classic signs of a failure cascade already in motion. Caught between peacetime procedure and wartime survival, running the engine just enough to turn for home embodied Banks's doctrine. Extra performance could save lives, but it demanded accelerated wear and carried real mechanical risk. Wilson turned for home nursing a failing power plant, while the Port Merlin carried a disproportionate load. They nearly made it when the starboard engine seized its prop windmilling uselessly. The Mosquito ditched in the North Sea, a thin line between survival and silence. After 90 minutes, air-sea rescue found them hypothermic, but alive. The lesson is stark. Higher boost, richer mixture, and only pristine engines can buy 10 extra miles per hour, and with it a chance to live, yet every gain exacts a mechanical price. That is the razor's edge between peacetime discipline and wartime necessity that Banks accepted to let the Mosquito outrun Germany's best fighters. The teardown revealed a failure cascade that began with an overheated exhaust valve. Sustained high-boost operations raised cylinder temperatures, microscopic cracks spread across the valve face, a small fragment broke off into the cylinder, and it shattered the piston crown, triggering catastrophic damage. This episode lays bare the true cost of speed survival gains. From higher boost come with accelerated wear, manageable only through strict hour limits, rigorous inspections, and maintenance discipline under Banks's regimen. It's a razor-thin line, where life-saving innovation meets mechanical risk. Fragments tore through the cylinder, seeded the oil with metal, and that abrasive slurry killed the bearings within minutes. Banks read the report like a man watching a forecasted accident finally arrive. He'd known all along that sustained high-power operation pushes components beyond their design life. The harsh truth stood, confirmed speed has a price, trading higher survival odds for accelerated wear, demanding uncompromising maintenance discipline and tight hour limits to hold the fragile line between performance and failure. The haunting question was whether tactical advantage justified the mechanical price. Wilson's near-fatal incident delivered the uncomfortable answer: the mathematics of acceptable loss is brutally cold. From June 1944 to March 1945, Mosquitoes with subtly overspec Merlins flew roughly 3,400 sorties, and the data revealed a hard truth: markedly better survival, in exchange for increased wear and more frequent failures. The core lesson in war speed can be armor. Deliberately shortening engine life to gain those few extra miles per hour can save entire crews. Peacetime engineering builds margins for all conditions. Banks showed that with immaculate maintenance and disciplined operation, you can tap a mission-specific margin, and that difference is measured in lives that made it home. In the war's final year, Banks' modified Mosquitoes drove combat losses down to 11 aircraft, just 0.32%. Standard spec airframes lost 47 across roughly 600 to 800 sorties, about 0.69%. In effect, the modified aircraft were twice as likely to make it home. The trade-off was 23 severe mechanical failures that forced emergency landings or abandonments. That's the wartime bargain. Higher boost, richer mixture, uncompromising maintenance discipline, accepting faster wear to buy more crews, a safe return. In the moral arithmetic of speed, Banks confronted a hard truth: 3 crews were lost, and 7 more were injured due to engine failures. Every modification that could save them from German fighters also risked their lives to their own power plants. Though the decision was never his alone, he carried the weight, accepting accelerated wear in exchange for higher survival odds so that mosquitoes had a better chance of coming home. Pilots requested the extra power, knowing the risks, while Banks carried the moral weight of every tweak his hands had raised. The boost chosen, the richer fuel jet, nudged the magneto timing. Squadron engineers faced a stark trade-off: keep peacetime limits for safety, and accept slower performance, or push beyond the line, and accept occasional catastrophic failures to buy life-saving speed under pursuit. The enduring lesson in war survival today can outweigh longevity tomorrow, and the ones willing to own that decision are often the reason the crew makes it home. On a brutal calculus of war commanders accepted eroding mechanical safety margins for one stark reason: enemy fire killed faster than mechanical failure. Being shot down over Germany meant death or long years in prison camps. Ditching because of an engine failure usually left a chance to survive if rescue arrived. The North Sea was merciless, but it was not the secret police. That cold logic drove the decision to push limits, trading engine life for a better chance of coming home. In that frame, off-manual tweaks turned speed into armor, and a frontline mechanic's initiative into the difference between life and death. Outwardly, Rolls-Royce remained unaware, but field service reps noticed Merlin wear patterns that didn't match rated operation, a telltale sign of sustained overboost. Questions were asked carefully, vague answers were given, and discreet reports flowed to Derby, forcing senior management to confront reality at the front. Speed meant survival. From that inflection point, reinforced by Mosquito crews, improved return rates, wartime logic overruled peacetime caution, culminating in formal recognition that allowed higher boost under strict conditions with maintenance, excellence, and rigorous monitoring as non-negotiables. Rolls-Royce quietly realized the Merlin engines were being run beyond specification successfully. Some engineers were privately intrigued. The factory limits had favored reliability and liability over peak performance, and they'd long suspected unused headroom. The Mosquito's field tweaks turned suspicion into evidence under rigorous maintenance and controlled conditions. Extra performance wasn't just possible, it saved lives. Banks' tweaks were, in essence, an unsanctioned field test program, generating the kind of evidence peacetime trials could never produce. Engines run to destruction in combat, with thousands of hours of high-stress operation, meticulously captured in maintenance logs. The cost was not only aircraft lost, it also fell on the ground crews, who carried the burden of every spanner turn and logbook signature, knowing each small decision might trade parts and paperwork for lives in the sky. Inside, cold, dim hangars, ground crews tending tuned. Merlins worked under unbroken pressure, every sign-off to fly, every choice to delay an overhaul by 10 hours, every acceptance of a marginal temperature reading carried life or death consequences for air crews. By early 1945, Flight Sergeant Yardley had developed an ulcer, a physical scar from shouldering that responsibility. This story isn't only about Mosquito speed or boost numbers, it exposes the hidden cost of wartime innovation, the psychological toll paid by the quiet hands beneath the wings, so others could have one more chance to come home. Several top fitters asked to transfer away from operations, unable to carry the psychological load. By late 1944, Banks himself looked years older. In just 2 years, he seemed to have aged a decade. He had learned the harsh truth: innovation can save lives and take them. Every extra bit of boost, every richer mixture, every push past the manual was a wager with air crews' lives. Yet in wartime, accelerated wear and shorter engine life could buy a higher chance that crews made it home. Banks's true legacy wasn't only a few more miles per hour, it was the courage to accept the consequences so that more men could return alive. Banks still believed the modifications were necessary, the combat statistics backed him, yet necessity never erased guilt when things went wrong. The question of whether to continue became moot in February 1945, when Rolls-Royce's chief engineer, Ernest Hives, arrived unannounced at Marham to witness the unvarnished reality rather than a polished inspection. Set piece. That moment pivoted the narrative. Instead of arguing in the shadows of procedure, hard technical truth and operational results were brought into the open, clearing the path to legitimize what had once lived between the lines of the manual. On the 12th of February, 1945 at RAF Marham, the managing director of Rolls-Royce's Aero Engine Division quietly drove to Workshop 3 and found Banks elbow-deep in a Merlin that had logged 100%, 47 hours since its last modification. He watched for exactly 10 minutes before speaking, and the candid technical exchange that followed turned an off-book boost tweak into sanctioned combat knowledge, a few more pounds of manifold pressure, a richer mixture traded for more speed, and a better chance to live. From that silent moment to the service bulletin on the 7th of March, 1945, was a single step. Rolls-Royce acknowledged unused safety margin, and Banks proved that innovation from the bottom can save crews over. Germany. Show me what you're doing, Sergeant, all of it. Over 3 hours, Banks calmly walked through boost control recalibration, fuel jet changes, and his selection criteria for only the freshest, most perfect engines. He neither apologized nor justified, he presented technical facts and combat outcomes. That moment became the bridge between field ingenuity and official doctrine, hard operational proof compelling the manufacturer to re-examine safety margins, and paving the way to legitimize modifications that had been quietly saving air crews. Banks laid out the technical reality and combat outcomes. Hives probed with precise questions on detonation margins, bearing loads, and thermal stresses. This wasn't an interrogation but a dialogue between two engineers tackling problems few could grasp. Hives arrived with service records for 200 randomly selected Merlin engines, turning rumor into verifiable data, the pivot that set the stage for officially sanctioning those beyond the manual tweaks. Hives spread the records across the workbench and saw exactly what Banks had predicted. The modified Merlins showed clearly higher wear, yet failure rates stayed within acceptable bounds when maintenance discipline was rigorous. In other words, free speed was never free. It was paid for with tighter inspections, shorter service intervals, and mechanics' vigilance traded for measurably better odds of survival. This was a pivot point, bottom-up initiative, validated by data, turning a gray area tweak into an operational lesson on how wartime trims peacetime safety margins to buy a few more miles per hour and a few more crews home. Ernest Hives was struck by the consistency. Banks's changes were not tinkering, but a coherent engineering method applied systematically. His notebook logged every modified engine, tallying 23 mechanical failures across 3,400 sorties, a failure rate of just 0.68%. Those cool numbers tell a burning truth: except accelerated wear to buy survival, with strict maintenance discipline turning risk into advantage. Consistency plus combat proof convinced leadership this was engineering, not recklessness. Hives compared the data. Standard Merlins failed at about 1/3 of 1%, while the modified engines failed twice as often. Yet aircraft with the modifications survived combat at twice the rate. The net result: fewer aircrew deaths. From a purely utilitarian view, Banks's tweaks saved lives, trading accelerated wear for a real chance to make it home. The turning point came when Ernest Hives didn't shut the unauthorized tweaks down. He thanked Banks for exposing safety margins Rolls-Royce had set too wide. Combat had proven those limits were larger than necessary under disciplined maintenance. From that moment, frontline ingenuity became sanctioned practice, controlled overboost, enriched mixtures, and tighter service intervals, trading accelerated wear for life-saving speed. Beyond bringing crews home, the decision reset the mindset: peacetime prizes, longevity; wartime prizes, survival; and with variables, tightly controlled engineering can unlock performance long hidden by caution. Banks didn't discover anything Rolls-Royce engineers didn't already know. In theory, he simply acted before committees could approve it. Within weeks, Rolls-Royce issued Technical Service Bulletin number 184, dated the 7th of March, 1945, officially authorizing higher boost on Merlin engines for specific roles under strict conditions: freshly overhauled engines, 100-octane fuel, and inspections every 150 hours. In short, bottom-up initiative was codified, turning a gray zone into a life-saving edge in the air. Banks's illegal tweaks became doctrine: engines only when fresh from overhaul, running verified 100-octane fuel with mandatory inspections every 150 hours, enriched fuel mixture standardized at high power settings, magneto timing unchanged. Rolls-Royce judged the added crankshaft stress excessive for general use, though not outright banned. The payoff, a legalized edge of speed, as armor trading somewhere for many crews, making it home. In a single night, the service bulletin turned Banks's gray market tweaks into official procedure, retroactively validating 2 years of off-book engineering and vindicating his technical judgment. Rolls-Royce didn't merely tolerate the work, they adopted it, and the impact spread beyond the Mosquito. Merlin-powered fighters were optimized, speed and survivability improved, and the credo of trading engine life for crew life became combat doctrine. Banks's legacy proves that frontline ingenuity backed by disciplined maintenance and real combat data can bend the rules to save more aircrews. With field-style tweaks, think safe boost increases and richer mixtures, late-model Spitfires and Mustangs running, Merlin engines gained sharper high-altitude performance enough to slip away from German jets. After the war, the Merlin 100 series baked those lessons in improved detonation, resistance, and higher sustainable boost, turning wartime survival know-how into enduring engineering standards. Banks's fingerprints marked the Merlin's final evolution, yet his name was absent from official development records. Recognition arrived in a peculiar form: promotion to warrant officer in April 1945, unusual for someone without aircrew status. It was a quiet reward for a frontline mind that turned safety margin into life-saving speed. The citation spoke in tidy bureaucracy, exceptional technical contributions to operational effectiveness, language that hid the real achievement. Pilots whose lives were saved by the modified engines wrote quiet letters or simply shook his hand on station visits because the best thank you was coming home alive. After the war, Rolls-Royce offered Banks a position at Derby, closing the arc of a mechanic who changed life and death odds through deep knowledge and uncompromising maintenance discipline. After the war, Banks accepted a role in Rolls-Royce experimental engine development, where his habit of pushing the limits became an asset rather than a liability. He left the Royal Air Force in September 1945, with a service record calling him competent and reliable, faint praise that missed the point. His off-book tweaks had saved hundreds of aircrew. The final operational tally, closed in June 1945 after Germany's surrender, showed Mosquitoes with Banks-style modifications surviving at markedly higher rates, turning speed into armor and bottom-up initiative into a living engineering legacy. In the war's final year, Mosquitoes with Banks-style tuned Merlins flew about 8,200 sorties and lost only 27 aircraft, roughly 0.33%. Standard Mosquitoes flew 4,100 sorties with 31 losses, about 0.76%. That gap proves how disciplined, modest tweaks, slightly higher, boost richer mixture, rigorous maintenance, cut losses by more than half, and saved around 200 aircrew, achieved almost entirely through careful attention to the engines. True safety margins. The Air Ministry never formally acknowledged the engine modifications behind the Mosquito's success. Official histories praised the aircraft's inherent design, true but incomplete. The Mosquito was brilliant, yet Banks made it better. Roderick Banks died in 1992 at age 76 in suburban Derby, after 47 years refining engines for Rolls-Royce. His obituary noted a distinguished aerospace career, yet said nothing about Mosquitoes or wartime engine tweaks. The tale nearly vanished until a Mosquito reunion in 1995, when 3 veterans independently mentioned Banks's engines, and a historian finally asked what it meant. From there, the full account emerged piece by piece: maintenance logs, squadron records, and interviews with surviving ground crew, revealing a quiet, life-saving legacy hidden in plain sight. From the rank of a sergeant, Banks delivered a rare kind of tactical innovation, true bottom-up ingenuity. He identified and used performance margins that engineers and officers missed or feared to touch, daring unauthorized adjustments in exchange for life-saving speed. Militaries, in theory, reward initiative. In practice, they often block exactly this kind of initiative. Banks's story proves that with deep technical mastery and owned responsibility, rules can bend when bending them saves lives. This story exposes an uncomfortable truth about engineering conservatism. Rolls-Royce's safety margins were prudent for general use, yet excessive when engines were flawlessly maintained and handled by skilled crews. Banks recognized the gap between safe for all conditions and optimal for specific conditions, and stepped into it with deep knowledge, rigorous maintenance discipline, and a willingness to trade increased wear for survival speed. The payoff wasn't merely a few extra miles per hour, it was a materially higher chance of coming home. The lasting lesson is clear: war demands a different standard than peacetime, and innovation that saves lives often rises from oil-stained workshops, not conference rooms with polished tables. The Mosquito and Banks's core lesson: the Merlin could sustain higher performance if variables were controlled, perfect maintenance, high-quality fuel, and rigorous monitoring. Manufacturer blanket limits effectively fenced off real available performance. That insight still applies today. Modern aircraft engines are conservatively rated to protect longevity and liability. Yet in tightly managed conditions with elite crews, additional performance can be unlocked at the cost of accelerated wear. A wartime trade-off Banks proved, with lives saved. In peacetime, manufacturers build wide safety margins to guard against liability and variable operating conditions. Yet in the field, military and commercial alike, operators often discover engines can deliver more than certified specs. Exploiting that surplus isn't reckless bravado. It demands deep technical mastery, obsessive quality control, down to the smallest tolerance, and a willingness to trade accelerated wear for performance when survival comes first. That is exactly what Banks did in wartime, turning peacetime margin into battlefield advantage, with uncompromising maintenance discipline as the final safeguard. In peacetime, engineering favors longevity, cost efficiency, and safety margins that tolerate imperfect maintenance. In wartime, the priority is survival, accepting reduced component life if it brings crews home today. The Mosquito story nails this truth. Banks's off-manual tweaks nibbled into the safety margin, trading a few dozen hours of engine life for roughly 10 to 15 extra miles per hour in combat, just enough to stretch the gap beyond enemy gun range. Once the results were undeniable, the rulebook changed, bottom-up initiative became sanctioned procedure, and the lasting lesson is clear: the right risk, at the right moment, under disciplined quality control. Banks embraced a hard trade-off. An engine lasting about 150 hours instead of 200 is worth it if those hours keep a crew from dying at minute 47. That mindset bridges the wartime Mosquito playbook: higher boost, richer mixtures, only fresh, perfectly maintained engines, to modern air combat, where 4th and 5th generation fighters carry official limits and combat limits that pilots tap only when survival demands it. The core lesson: peacetime optimizes longevity and universal safety. Wartime maximizes the odds of coming home, accepting faster wear to buy a few more precious percentage points of survival. Banks's doctrine: trading engine life for survival, became a combat norm. Accept accelerated wear to gain crucial performance when it matters. Modern fighters like the 15 carry emergency thrust ratings that shorten engine life but save crews in decisive moments. The Mosquito's post-war legend shines brighter because many celebrated speed figures and survivability rates trace back to those wartime off-book modifications Banks and his network dared to implement. Many of the performance figures cited by historians actually reflect Mosquitoes that Banks had quietly modified, not the standard specification. Those unsanctioned extra knots helped make the Mosquito legendary, giving it its iconic speed. The irony is stark that fame was built on field tweaks that technically violated every maintenance regulation, yet in wartime the line between peacetime rules and survival needs blurs. Banks read the safety margins, nudged them carefully, and paid the debt with rigorous maintenance discipline. The result: just enough speed to trade being caught for getting home, and a lasting lesson in bottom-up innovation. Roderick Banks's story is now a classic case study in engineering education: practical problem-solving versus institutional procedure. His off-manual tweaks were grounded in sound reasoning and rigorous maintenance, forcing the hard question of when rules should be followed and when they must be challenged. There is no comfortable answer, only trade-offs measured against wartime realities. The operational verdict was clear: Banks was right. He turned engineering margin into human survival. Those off-manual adjustments saved lives, yet if they had failed, the mechanic would have faced charges of recklessness. The deeper lesson is where innovation truly comes from. Not only design offices or research labs, but the but workshops where hands-on problem solvers confront reality without institutional blinkers. War trades component life for survival. Peacetime prizes safety and longevity. Mastering technical margins, maintenance discipline, and personal accountability turns rule-bending into life-saving, not excuse-making. Banks wasn't smarter than Rolls-Royce's engineers. He was differently positioned, answering to different incentives and willing to take risks company engineers could not. That vantage point let him tap hidden safety margins and translate them into life-saving speed for the Mosquito. After the war, his Marham workshop was torn down in 1962. Nothing marks the spot where he tuned DZ-414 or trained the fitters who quietly spread the technique. His legacy isn't a plaque, it's survival statistics. A few more miles per hour, a widening gap, more crews coming home. It's a field-forged lesson: when peacetime rules lag war's reality, accountable courage can unlock performance everyone else left on the table. The Mosquito that carried Banks's tweaks on Operation Jericho survived the war only to be scrapped in the year 1947. Its historic engines melted down for aluminum, the physical evidence gone, leaving documents and fading memories. Yet Banks's influence endures in ways he never witnessed. Modern engine programs now bake in frontline feedback loops, with operators reporting performance margins, turning workshop intuition into official procedure, a legacy proving that bottom-up innovation can set the standard for an entire era. In the post-war era, engineers moved from prohibit by default to investigate and validate. Rolls-Royce's successor companies created formal channels for field service representatives to report unusual yet successful operational practices, institutionalizing what Banks had done informally. The lasting legacy is a new technical culture: listen to frontline experience, measure real-world impact, then formalize what works, balancing safety, longevity, and performance to bring more aircrews home alive. The Mosquito's legend endures because it kept doing what everyone said was impossible: flying to Berlin and back, precision bombing Gestapo headquarters, and outrunning the Luftwaffe's finest across 6 years of war. That success rested on Geoffrey de Havilland's brilliant design, and on one mechanic who read the manuals, understood the margins, and chose to bend rules when doing so saved lives. Sometimes victory belongs to the one who knows where to follow limits and where to push past them to keep crews alive today.